Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live webinar brought to you by ImmigrationQuestion.com, your trusted source for immigration news, expert legal insights, and real time conversations with experienced immigration attorneys. My name is Anusia Mukherjee, and I'll be your host for today's essential and practical session Best Practices for Letters of Recommendation for EB1A and EB2 NIW cases. For EB1A and EB2 NIW petitions, strong letters of recommendation can make the difference between approval and denial. These letters aren't just formalities, they're persuasive evidence of your achievements, your skills, and the impact of your work. But crafting letters that truly strengthen your case requires strategy, precision, and the right approach. That's why this conversation will focus on what makes a recommendation letter effective, how to choose the right recommenders, and how to ensure your letters align with your overall petition strategy. We are honored to be joined again today by attorney Ingrid Perez, an accomplished immigration attorney who understands the U.S. immigration process both personally and professionally. Born in Brazil and fluent in English, Portuguese, and Spanish, attorney Perez has helped exceptional professionals secure EB1A, EB2, NIW, and O1 approvals, and has guided small to medium businesses in hiring global talent. Her detail driven and strategic approach has turned complex immigration challenges into success stories, making her a trusted advisor for clients worldwide. Welcome to the show, Attorney Perez. We're glad to have you back again.
Thank you for having me.
Before we dive in, a quick and important reminder ImmigrationQuestion.com is a two in one platform that connects users with licensed immigration attorneys. We are not a law firm and we are not affiliated with AILA or USCIS. All legal services are provided independently by attorneys in our network. So, Attorney Perez, let's dive in. For someone just beginning their EB1A or EB2 NIW process, what role do letters of recommendation play in the overall application? Why are they so critical?
So I think letters of recommendation really help put evidence into context. I always, in the beginning of a case, in the beginning of a client relationship, I always want to understand what the case is about, the types of evidence the client will have, the types of projects or accomplishments we want to highlight. And I want to strategically, I want to start thinking about strategically who's in the best position to write the letters. Can the client tap into their network to provide letters? Are we going to even use letters, right? There are some cases that may not need letters. So I want to start thinking from the beginning strategically how we are going to place them in the petition, kind of like a puzzle. Which piece of the puzzle is this letter going to, serve? So that's how I like to think about it. And I think they're really important early on to start thinking about and think about who the petitioner or the applicant is going to start, asking for the letters of recommendation and then the types of information that we're going to provide and making sure that those people remain available to sign the letters once they're finalized.
All right, perfect. Thank you. My next question would be what key elements should every strong letter of recommendation include to effectively support an EB1A or EB2 NIW petition?
I think that's a great question. And I always like to tell my clients to think of these letters as testimonials. These are expert testimonials. These are not glowing letters of recommendation where they're giving lots of compliments about your work ethic, your personality, your camaraderie. We're not looking for that. We are looking for expert testimonials that will provide detailed, quantifiable information. So, for example, some of the elements that I always look for is I want to first establish who the person is, maybe a paragraph or two about who the letter writer is, how they know you, which establishes their basis of knowledge to be able to talk about your work. And then I want the letter writer to get into the details, the meat of the letter, right? So perhaps they are talking about one specific project where the individual had a major role in or achieved an important milestone. And we want to talk about that project, put that project into context. What was the problem that was happening? What was the solution that the petitioner developed, right? What were the outcomes? What were the benefits? How did this help? So we want to go through all of that in a letter. and be very strategic, and also make sure that there are other documentary evidence on the record that corroborates the letter.
Okay. That was insightful, Attorney Perez. So, from your experience, what are some common mistakes or weaknesses you see in recommendation letters that can undermine an otherwise strong case?
So I think this question is key because now that we have I have been seeing lots of people try to write their letters with AI, which I don't think is good practice because I know when something is written through AI. The sentences are really long, they are non-descriptive, they are just lots of compliments, very flowery language, and I like to avoid that. The moment I start reading a letter and my mind starts to wander, I know the letter is not serving the purpose. So always think about it through the perspective of the immigration officer. That officer is going to be reading dozens of cases a day. They're going to be tired by the time they get to your case. You want to drive the point home. I think that's super important to avoid using AI. If you want to use AI strategically to maybe rephrase a paragraph using active language, I think that's totally fine, but definitely don't rely on AI alone. Another thing that I see sometimes in letters that I think hurt people, right, are certain buzzwords that immigration does not like. So, for example, if the letter writer is talking about your potential, right, then it may mean to an immigration officer that you are not well positioned to advance your endeavor because they are talking about your potential. You have to really identify what that letter writer is going to say and provide, again, like the quantifiable, information that is very clear and descriptive. So I stay away from that type of sort of language, right? And then finally, you have to, one thing that I always try to make sure that I don't do is have repetitive letters. I don't like, two letter writers to discuss the same thing. I don't want two letter writers to talking about the same project or giving the same results. You have to be strategic about who's going to provide these letters to you, and also what are they going to write about. You want to have a mix of letters. You don't want them sounding the same.
All right, thank you for that. For EB1A and EB2 NIWs, how important is it to have recommenders who are independent, meaning they haven't worked directly with the applicant, versus those who have collaborated closely?
So I think it all depends because it really depends on the argument and the theme of a person's case, right? So for EB2 and IWs, for example, what we want to avoid is showing that the person's contribution, that their work is going to be purely for that employer. We want to avoid USCIS saying that, you should just get a perm instead. So I think having independent letters in the context of an EB2 and IW is really important. It's okay if you're getting a letter from an employer or a direct supervisor or somebody that knows about your work, but I think having a mix is also really good. For EB1As, it could be a little bit different because the EB1A analysis is completely different, right? And it also depends on the criterion that you're using the letter for. So, for example, if you're talking about a leading or critical role, it is really important to get a letter from a person that supervised you or a person that worked with you who can talk about your role in that distinguished organization. If you're talking about an original contribution of major significance, then having perhaps an outsider who can talk about the significance of that contribution, how maybe their organization was impacted, how the field has changed or improved, then for sure you want to look outside of your employer. However, I've used letters from employers to talk about the impact as well. I think it all depends on the case and if we can get a nice mix of letters that, again, are not going to all sound the same.
All right, thank you for that. Now, my next question would be, do you recommend applicants draft their own letters for review by the recommender, or should they leave the writing entirely to the recommender?
So I like to write the letters for my clients. I prefer to have either myself write the letters or the client write the letters. I don't like to leave it up to the recommender because I want to be able to edit that letter. I want to be able to ask questions, and I want to make sure that I write in the way that I know immigration will like. So I like to pre-draft those letters as much as possible, whether it's, me or my team writing or the client writing, it really doesn't matter. I like to have the final say, but of course, I also want to give the letter writer the opportunity to add any information or correct any information, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who have to sign, so they have to be comfortable with the information.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Attorney Perez. Session so far has been very informative. To everyone joining us from Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, thank you for being here. Whether you're a legal professional, community advocate, or someone just looking to understand this better, we're grateful to have you. And if this is your first time with us, welcome. We are immigrationquestion.com, a two-in-one platform built with outstanding features to help simplify the immigration process. Though we are not affiliated with AILA, we are trusted by many AILA attorneys who have used our platform. With immigrationquestion.com, you can also ask your immigration questions for free in any language and get connected with a licensed attorney for legal guidance. And yes, just like many of our users, you may receive a free confidential initial consultation. Just visit www.immigrationquestion.com to learn more. And it gets better. We've just launched a new mobile app designed to make access even easier, whether you're an attorney or a user. Now, Attorney Perez, as someone who understands the immigration process both personally and professionally, how would you describe the impact immigrationquestion.com is having on the immigrant community and on immigration attorneys like yourself?
I think that having a platform where people can go to for reliable information, and not only that, but also be connected with licensed attorneys, is really important. There's just so much misinformation and so many people out there pretending to be lawyers and not doing good work, that I think it's really important to make sure that you're working with a qualified legal professional.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for that. We never get tired of hearing that. It also makes us glad to know that both attorneys and immigrants benefit immensely from our platform. Before we dive into the Q&A session, if you could give just one piece of advice to someone preparing for the recommendation letter package right now, what would it be?
I would say look at the policy manual. Read the USCIS policy manual, whether it's chapter 2 or chapter 5, depending on the petition that you're filing. And really, read it a few times, maybe print it, mark it up, underline it, because those two documents have such, a wealth of information that you can use, and that you can use the letters to answer. So I think, I love empowering my clients and having them be part of the process. And I think it's really important that they understand at least why maybe we are asking for more information, why we want more detailed, and not, a cursory overview of what the recommender is going to be talking about. It's really because we're trying to address as many of the points as possible, and giving the immigration officer a guide, right, as to how they should adjudicate your case.
Definitely. Now we're moving on to our live Q&A session. So if you've got a question for Attorney Perez, now's your moment. Drop your questions in the chat or call us live at 516-703-3483. All right, our first question is, do my letters of recommendation have to come from people in the US, or can strong references from my home country still carry weight?
So if you are in the United States, I like getting letters from the United States. However, if there is a specific purpose why we are getting a letter from somebody abroad, we definitely include that as well on the case. If you're outside of the United States, it's going to be difficult, I think, a lot of times for somebody to get a letter from somebody in the US. But I do think that, especially if you're outside of the United States, getting a letter from a professional here in the US that maybe understands your endeavor, knows you, knows your work, and maybe want to work with you in the future is is very good. I always tell my clients to tap into their networks, and start thinking about who can they reach out to support them in their immigration journey. And I think, having at least a letter or two from somebody inside the United States, if you're petitioning yourself from abroad, is great.
All right, perfect. Next question is, I've contributed to multiple high impact projects, but I was part of a large team. How do I get my recommenders to highlight my individual achievements instead of the group success?
Well, I think that your recommenders then need to maybe pinpoint to perhaps into specific problems that you solved, specific solutions that you developed, leadership opportunities that you took within that bigger project, right? How you helped perhaps steer the group in the right direction. Any opportunity to highlight your individual contributions. I think it really begins with you mapping it out for the recommender, right? Explain exactly what it is that you want them to write. Pre-draft that letter for them, because you know your project very well, you know your role, your contributions, and present that to them to make sure that they focus on you and not just the group.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Next question is, I have strong academic references, but none of them are world renowned. Is it better to have a famous but distant recommender or a less famous person who knows me deeply?
So, when it comes to academic references, I'm assuming that this person is talking about university and college professors that know the person's work, maybe body of research or whatnot. I think that it's fine to not have a person who is perhaps very well known in the academic field, because it's really important that the writer has personal knowledge about your achievements, and how you perhaps spearheaded something, or how you improved something, or how you achieve success in something. So I think the person having personal knowledge is more important. Now, a person who may know you somewhat, but is very well known within a field, if they can talk in a general sense about the importance of your project for the field, or for the industry, or for the body of research, then of course, even if they don't know your work in and out, if they don't know you extremely well, that letter may also hold a lot of weight, because they can give more context as to how you had a broader impact. So I would say, if you have the opportunity to get both, go for it.
Thank you. Next question. Do my recommenders need to explicitly mention the national interest of my work, or will USCIS make the connection on their own?
You cannot assume that USCIS will do anything. You have to make the connection, and you have to make the argument for them. I think it depends on the purpose of the letter, right? If this person is writing a letter as somebody who's familiar with the field, who's familiar with the industry, who's familiar with where the United States wants to go as far as, the specific technology is going, or maybe, problems that the United States may need to solve, and how your endeavor is going to help the United States achieve that solution, then that person should describe instead of telling that your work is in the national interest. So, just back when we were learning to write descriptively, right? It's all about showing, not telling. I think that it's really important that these letter writers show how your work is in the national interest, instead of making the conclusion for the immigration officer. I think then it's in the legal brief that I would tie it in a very pretty bow for the immigration officer, that this work is in the national interest, because, letter writer, whoever, right, discusses the importance of the work. So I would tie it that way.
All right, perfect. Next question is, and this is our last question. If if my research is mostly regional impact right now, but potentially national importance in the future, how should my recommenders frame that?
So this is a tricky question, because I would need more context. Just because, at least for an EB2 national interest waiver, right? And we can talk about it in the context of both EB2 NIWs and EB1As. EB2 NIW does not need to be national in scope, right? There are many endeavors that are regional that are still nationally important, right? So I think that the letters, and I'll give you an example, right? So for example, an endeavor that is aimed at helping achieve more affordable housing in a specific region of the country may be regional. However, it is a national priority to create more housing for Americans, right? That is a very sort of simple, basic example, one that comes to the top of my mind because I did a case like that. So I would frame it that way, right? That even though the impact of your research is regional, still the United States has an interest in it, right? Has an interest in advancing that type of research. Now, for an EB1A, it becomes a little bit tricky because for EB1A, you do want to stay away from the regional. You do want to you do want to show national or international level impact. So, if that is your situation, if you're looking for an EB1A, then I would try to frame it in a way where you are just having that broader impact in the field generally, and how your research is perhaps being utilized by many within the field, right? Even if it's in a regional sort of geographical location.
All right, thank you. We still have one more question. So this would be our last one. How many recommendation letters are actually needed for NIW? I've heard some say 3 is enough, while others recommend 6 or more. What's the right balance?
I like quality over quantity. I tell my clients 3, maximum 4 to 5, depending on the reasons why we're writing or submitting the letters. I don't like to rely just on letters for an NIW. I like to have the letters, again, provide context and tell a story. So I would say the sweet spot for me is 3, the maximum is 5.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Attorney Perez, for those. Thank you for your insights. This information is invaluable for professionals in investigating or navigating the EB1A and EB2 NIW process and trying to put together the strongest case possible. To our audience, thank you again for joining us. We hope this conversation gave you clarity on the best practices for letters of recommendation for EB1A and EB2 NIW cases. Don't forget, at immigrationquestion.com, you can ask your immigration questions for free and get in touch with a licensed attorney who understands your case. You may also be eligible for a free confidential consultation, so head over to www.immigrationquestion.com and sign up today. And if you want to revisit this session and share it with a colleague, you can catch the replay on Spotify. Just search Borderless Talk by immigrationquestion.com. Join us again on Friday for another enlightening conversation. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Once again, thank you so much, Attorney Perez. We can't wait to have you back again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.